light of this scripture, Romans 6:23. For the wages sin pays is death. Now, do we want to demand our wages? We can demand our wages. We're entitled to them. Wages, we have earned them. Who is in a hurry to demand those wages? Very few people indeed. And yet we have earned them all right, because we sin every day. For the wages sin pays is death. But the gift God gives is everlasting life by Christ Jesus our Lord. It is a gift. We cannot demand a gift. It is undeserved kindness on Jehovah's part, and we should be very grateful indeed. And therefore, we do not go to Jehovah with a demanding attitude, but rather with humility when we think in terms of our inheritance. But now the question is, do we really perceive and appreciate this inheritance in our case? How valuable is the inheritance to you? Would you change it for anything else? Now the situation could arise. What about if the authorities came in and said, Jehovah's Witnesses are now banned, all your kingdom halls closed down, your assembly halls closed down, and furthermore, you either give up this religion, this subversive religion, or go to prison for 10 years. There's a price to pay. 10 years in prison. And yet many of our brothers have paid the price. They have valued the inheritance. They have been willing to pay those 10 years or more in prisons and concentration camps. But what about if someone came with a monetary offer and said, look, I'll give you $1 million if you'll break away from that religion. Just drop it. Now think about that. That's a lot of money, isn't it? What could you do with $1 million? That's a temptation. Would we sacrifice our inheritance for $1 million? Now, if we were to entertain such an idea, then think of another question. For how long? For how long would you be able to enjoy your $1 million? It's worthwhile pondering. Who can guarantee even that he will be here tomorrow? No one can guarantee that point. See, who knows how much life is left for each one in the glass of life? I use this as a comparison, because as one gets older, one begins to appreciate how swiftly life has passed by, and one doesn't realize it. When one is young, one just sees a glass full of life, glass full of water, there it is, and you drink glug, 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 and you're enjoying it lovely. And the years go just like that. And then suddenly when you hit 40, 45, 50, and that puts me in there, you suddenly look at the glass and think, ooh, how much is left? How much is left? And no one really knows. So would we exchange our inheritance for $1 million? It would be so foolish. Why? Because the inheritance is worth far more. How wise then is Paul's counsel to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6 verses 17 to 19. And these are words we want to apply to ourselves, brothers, because Paul told Peter to tell the Christians of his time these very words. He was not referring to the people in the world. It's our integrity we are concerned with. It is our inheritance that we are preoccupied about. And so that is why the counsel must apply to us, and we must read it as applying to us. Give orders to those who are rich in the present system of things, not to be high-minded, and to rest their hope not on uncertain riches, but on God, who furnishes us all things richly for our enjoyment. So way back there in the early Christian congregation, there were wealthy brothers in the truth, and we have wealthy brothers and sisters in the truth today, and they enjoy the same happiness that we all have. But maybe they do have an additional test, And that is the test of perspective and keeping things in the right proportion and keeping their attitude towards their brothers in the right proportion also. So he says not to be high-minded, not to rest their hope on their uncertain riches and how uncertain they are. I was reading a case recently in the newspaper, just comes to mind, I don't have it with me, but it's from the Lebanon, Beirut, this terrible situation there. And an Arab woman comes screaming out, screaming against other Arabs. Why? They had desolated her house. They had ransacked and looted her house. She'd had to flee from the house during the fighting. And she goes back and finds that nothing is left. And she screamed at them. 10 years I worked for that. 10 years I worked for my home and for everything that was in that home. And you have destroyed it. And the soldier came back with a very appropriate answer. He said, "Madam, give thanks that you are alive." And she still didn't appreciate it. She still thought that her home and her possessions were more important and that they had smashed everything. Well, for her, they had smashed everything. Why? Because all her values were material instead of spiritual. She had no spiritual values. So we see why it is so important to have an appreciation of the true inheritance. That's why Paul goes on to say in verse 18, to work at good. And here he's speaking again of those who are rich in the present system of things. To work at good, to be rich in fine works, to be liberal, ready to share, safely treasuring up for themselves a fine foundation for the future. And this certainly is not in any property or bank account, but it is that account that we hold with God. A fine foundation for the future in order that they may get a firm hold on what? On the real life. That's a lovely expression. The real life. Not this life we have at present, which for so many is just an existence. Maybe in this part of the world, life is still relatively sweet and one can enjoy many things. But we have to remember that many of our brothers in other parts of the world are literally living at the poverty level. If we were to visit some of our brothers in the conditions in which they have to live in certain countries of the world, then it would perhaps be a shock to us. The missionaries know about it because they've been out there and they've seen it and they live with the people and work with the people. But let us not forget that this is the case. That for millions of people in the world, there is no such thing even as life. All they have is existence, trying to survive. I spoke to a missionary from India a few weeks ago. She said, in India, the problem is not what shall we do next month or next year. There's no idea of planning for next month or next year. A vast proportion of the Indian population are only planning for tomorrow. Can they survive until tomorrow? Because their basic problem is just food. Just having enough to eat today that they may still be alive tomorrow. She said that she would walk through the streets of Calcutta to perhaps get to a place to take a drink. She would literally step over dead bodies lying on the street. Walking up a stairway, people would suddenly diverge, both sides, and she thought, what's happening? Why are they diverging like this? And when she got there, she saw why. A dead baby on the staircase, just abandoned, left. I mention these things, brothers, to help us to get a perspective that is a world perspective, because we belong to Jehovah's people, and as Jehovah's people, we belong to the world, not to just one section of it. And that's why we speak of a new heavens and a new earth. We're speaking of the world brotherhood of Jehovah's people, the Christian witnesses of Jehovah. And therefore we want to have a firm hold on the real life, and that is the life that Jehovah offers through Christ Jesus. Not this transient existence. And so the question is, do we appreciate that life? How much? And how do we show it? Our appreciation with regards to true life and with regards to our inheritance is closely related to our spirituality, to our set of spiritual values and standards that we have derived from our knowledge of Jehovah and his spiritual qualities and moral excellence. All of this is involved in our spirituality. Are we spiritual persons? Do spiritual values predominate in our lives? Do we have a close relationship with Jehovah? Is Jehovah your close friend to whom you can speak freely each day? Do we speak freely to Jehovah each day and in any moment? That's the kind of relationship that we want to have. Or has Jehovah become for us some vague concept of someone out there in the universe? Reminds me so much of the way so many people used to answer us in preaching work in Barcelona. And you'd ask them, do you believe in God? ¿Cree usted que hay un Dios? Do you believe in God? And they would answer, bueno, debe haber algo por ahí, algo por ahí. That means there must be something out there, something out there. What a concept of God, something out there. Well, we have to be careful that we don't fall into the same trap. That because of neglecting our personal study and our relationship, then Jehovah can suddenly become very distant, something out there. Not even a name to the something. Something out there. Jehovah means more than that to us. Our relationship should be like the beautiful relationship that David had, even though he too fell at times. But he became very much aware of his situation, and he wrote one of the most beautiful psalms of the whole collection. Very simple, brief psalm, and yet it says so much, and it's a good one to go back to time and time again, brothers. Psalm 23. This is a precious piece of poetry. And that's something else to remember. Poetry written 3,000 years ago, before our language even existed. English didn't exist 3,000 years ago, nor Spanish, nor our literature. But the Hebrews had their language, and they had their poetry, sublime poetry. And notice these opening words, because if we can get the same attitude, then we are always going to appreciate our inheritance, because we'll have a close relationship to Jehovah. How does it read? Psalm 23, Jehovah is my shepherd. Is Jehovah your shepherd? Because when David said, Jehovah is my shepherd, then what was David? He was a sheep. He just put himself into the skin of a sheep, and he starts trying to think like a sheep. Jehovah is my shepherd, I shall lack nothing. Do we have that same conviction? If we have this close relationship to Jehovah, then we will have it. And then we can go on to say, in grassy pastures he makes me lie down, by well-watered resting places he conducts me. How beautiful that must be for a sheep, and David knew that. He'd been a shepherd. And so he put himself into the skin of a sheep. And he was thinking of all the beautiful things that a sheep must appreciate. And having a shepherd who will take you by all these beautiful pastures and where there's plenty of water to drink. My soul he refreshes. He leads me in the tracks of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk in the valley of deep shadow, I fear nothing bad, for you are with me. You are with me. Is Jehovah with you every day? It depends on us. It depends on our approach to Jehovah, our cultivating the relationship with Jehovah. Jehovah can be with us, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff are the things that comfort me. You arrange before me a table in front of those showing hostility to me. With oil you have greased my head. My cup is well filled. Surely goodness and loving kindness themselves will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Jehovah to the length of days. Isn't it a beautiful psalm, brothers? There we find these terse expressions, terse sentences of conviction. Well, now, if we have Jehovah as our shepherd, how can we possibly commit gross sins? How can we possibly sacrifice our integrity if we can really see Jehovah by our side, not a huge distance away from us, by our side? Here's the shepherd, and we can see the shepherd out of the corner of the eye. well then it's so easy to keep integrity. We feel secure, and we can always show appreciation for our inheritance. So let's analyze this then, our appreciation for our inheritance, by taking an example from true life. We're going to examine the case here of an inheritance. The famous twins, Esau and Jacob. And you can open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 25. We're going to analyze these verses here. And as we do, it would be good to try to think in terms of our own situation, our own mentality and perception with regard to spiritual things. We're going to examine these two young men, taking into account their background, try to understand something of the psychology of the situation. Because as we do, it will tell us much about the spirituality of each one of these brothers, twin brothers, Esau and Jacob. At the same time, we may be able to begin to see something about ourselves. Now, to get the story straight, we first of all have to remember they were twins. Right. But even twins, by the law of nature, have to line up to be born. They can't be born simultaneously. Right? So as a consequence, it means that even though twins, one has to be the firstborn, whether it be by a difference of seconds or minutes or hours. In this particular case, it came to be a matter of seconds, because the second came out holding on to the heel of the first, the Bible account tells us. But nevertheless, the first one, Esau, was the firstborn. Now that made a big difference, because it meant that in the future he would have a very special inheritance, because the firstborn was entitled to a double portion in the inheritance of the father on the death of the father. Now what would it mean in the case of these twins? The inheritance obviously would mean maybe flocks, vast flocks of animals, not very much land. There was a burial ground that belonged to the family. They were hardly going to fight about a burial ground. But there was something far more important involved in their inheritance, something intangible but vital. A promise. The promise of Genesis chapter 22, verses 16 to 18, where we read, "By myself I do swear as the utterance of Jehovah, that by reason of the fact that you have done this thing, and you have not withheld your son, your only one, I shall surely bless you," this is speaking to Abraham, "and I shall surely multiply your seed like the stars of the heavens, and like the grains of sand upon the seashore. And your seed will take possession of the gate of his enemies." Now here comes the vital point. "And by means of your seed, all nations of the earth will certainly bless themselves due to the fact that you have listened to my voice." So here we find in this promise to Abraham, and then passed down through Isaac, and thus through the line, we find involved the promise regarding the seed, the promised seed, the line that would produce the Messiah. Now this was the vital factor involved in an inheritance, in a birthright that properly belonged to Esau as the firstborn. But did Esau appreciate his inheritance? Let's read, brothers, Genesis 25, verse 27. And it tells us, "And the boys got bigger, and Esau became a man knowing how to hunt, a man of the field. But Jacob, a blameless man, dwelling in tents." The verse says very little, and yet perhaps says a lot. Because by using the expression, a blameless man, it seems to infer by contrast that maybe Esau was not quite so blameless. Other translations say Esau, a man of the open plains, but Jacob led a settled life, and settled among the tents, says the New English Bible. The Jerusalem Bible says Jacob was a quiet man. So now this seems to already start telling us something. Esau, apparently a man of the plains, a restless man, and we know too, impulsive, whereas Jacob was a settled man. and apparently would appreciate spiritual values. And now in verse 28, see if some of you parents can identify yourselves with this one. Verse 28, and Isaac, the father, had love for Esau, because it meant game in his mouth. In other words, the father liked to have meat on the table. He liked to eat meat. And because Esau was the hunter, then the father was predisposed to favor Esau. But it says, whereas Rebekah was a lover of Jacob. Now, we're not recommending this by any means, but I think some of us have actually lived through the experience. To be in a family and know that father had a favorite son or favorite daughter, and that mother also had her favorite. At least I know that happened in my family, and I wasn't the favorite. And we know that it does lead to resentment, and parents have to be very careful on this point, because it's so easily to fall into this trap without even realizing that you do show favoritism to a certain child over the other children, maybe. I dealt with a case on this just this last week, a shepherding call, where this was precisely the problem. 3 children, and the eldest of the 3 boys resented the other 2. Why? Because he felt the mother showed them more love and affection than she did to him. See the point? Well, anyway, we've got a very human situation here in verse 28. But now we continue. Once Jacob was boiling up some stew when Esau came along from the field, and he was tired. So Esau said to Jacob, "Quick, please, give me a swallow of the red there, for I'm tired." The red was red lentil stew. Red lentils. That is why his name was called Edom, which means red. And to this Jacob said, "Sell me, first of all, your righteous firstborn." Now we're getting into an interesting situation. Let's analyze what's going on here. In this verse 29 and 30, we are dealing with an incident that is going to change history. We see, first of all, that Esau is in a hurry. "Quick, please, give me a swallow of the red there, for I'm tired." And then Jacob comes up with a very unusual proposition. Now we read this and we take it for granted, but I think we should stop and analyze. Put ourselves right into the situation, even identify with one or other of the brothers and start thinking. Because isn't it strange that Esau comes in asking for a plate of lentil stew, and what does his brother do? He starts making a very important proposition. He says, "Sell me first of all your righteous firstborn." Now don't you think that sounds a little crazy? I mean that. Because do you think he's got any chance of coming out with that one? He's asking for the birthright of the firstborn, and all he's going to offer him is 1 plate of stew, or maybe 2. Now, in human terms, normal human terms, would that be a very practical proposition? Would it have much chance of coming through? Well, Jacob seemed to think so. Why? Because he obviously knew his brother, his tendencies, and his spiritual values. Was he right in his estimation? Let us continue reading, verse 32. And Esau continued. How did Esau answer? Esau continued, "Here I am simply going to die. And of what benefit to me is a birthright?" Oh, well, so Jacob had weighed up his brother very well. Because now you see Esau is saying that he's going to die. So what's the good of a birthright, especially if the promises involved are way down the line? I'm hungry. According to him, he's dying of hunger. And so he's saying, "Give me some of that stew, because that is the most important thing right now." The New English Bible says, "I'm at death's door. What use is my birthright to me?" Well, here we learn a lot more about Esau, because he spurns his birthright. Now, why? because he paid more attention to his physical needs and desires than to his spiritual heritage, the promise. Perhaps he was thinking in this way, well, that promise is a long way off. I'm hungry now, I'll take the soup. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, that kind of thing. But let us analyze to another point about him. Notice his exaggeration. Here I am at death's door. Here I'm going to die. Well, was that really true? Was he really going to die? Were things as bad as that? Well, we've only got to read verse 34 to find out. Because verse 34 says, and Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he went to eating and drinking. Then he got up and went his way. That's a remarkable recovery. For someone who's supposed to be dying, and with 2 plates of stew, we'll grant him 2, he's back on his feet and off he goes. And he was dying. Now this tells us a lot, not just about Esau, it can tell us a lot about ourselves. Because don't we sometimes have the same attitude? Don't we sometimes exaggerate our own physical condition, maybe our health problems or whatever, and we crave for something so anxiously that we are willing to sacrifice certain spiritual values. We'll sacrifice a meeting because we're exaggerating a physical condition or a physical desire or a craving of different kinds. And we will sacrifice spiritual things because we're exaggerating and we fail to realize it. And that's exactly what happened here. And we have a lesson for ourselves because it really means appreciating our inheritance. So we can see in verse 32 that Esau did exaggerate the situation. But now in verse 33, Jacob comes back again. And here again he shows his perception of his brother. And Jacob added, swear to me first of all. Yes, he wanted this to be a legal transaction. This is an interesting commentary on life then and today. Swear first of all. No written documents, nothing in quadruplicate, no one else present to sign as witnesses. It wasn't necessary. Just to swear it before God. And that was a contract. Today, as I said, quadruplicate, in writing, signed by witnesses, and it isn't worth the paper it's written on. Because people today do not honor their word. Isn't that so, brothers? Especially you who are involved in business transactions, you know how difficult it is to tie your clients down, to have them honor their written word, their promise. But in those days, swear to me first of all. In other words, don't come back later on saying to me that you were only joking. No, this is no joke. We're talking seriously. You want stew, I want the birthright. Are you willing to swear? So he had a chance to step back and, oh, no. If it's as serious as that, oh, no, well, I'll just manage. No. He wasn't willing to manage. Swear to me first of all. And he proceeded to swear to him and to sell his right as firstborn to Jacob. And that's how it happened. He lost his inheritance. And Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he went to eating and drinking. Then he got up and went his way. Doesn't even say whether he said thank you. I believe he said please. Yes, he did say please. Verse 30, he said please. A little detail, but it is important. But now an interesting comment. A comment comes on verse 34. Few words. So Esau despised. Esau despised the birthright. And that comment tells us everything. Now, do we despise our birthright in any shape or form? See, Esau opted for a fast return rather than guarantee a blessing for his future generations. Quick, give me some of the red. Well, now we've got to examine ourselves. What does all this have to do with us? Where do we fit in? Well, who do we imitate? Do we imitate Esau? or Jacob? Or do we imitate a little of both at different times? What lesson can we learn? Certainly the Apostle Paul was very conscious of this case, because he brought it up in his letter to the Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 14 to 16. Hebrews 12, 14 to 16. Paul says, "Pursue peace with all people, and the sanctification, without which no man will see the Lord." This really is another vital point, sanctification. To be holy because Jehovah is holy. To be a holy people, a different people. We are different and we have to be different. And if we're worried about it, too bad. Jehovah's Witnesses will always be different from everybody else, precisely because we are Jehovah's Witnesses. You must be holy because I am holy. Therefore, this sanctification implies being different. If we really want to receive the inheritance, we have to be different. We have to be like the one who offers the inheritance. That is why we will never be, as far as this system is concerned, we will never be a respectable religion. We are not interested in being respectable, because to be respectable means to compromise. To compromise with the false system of things in religion and politics. To go along with them, with their, what I call, soft-bellied ideas. Compromise, interfaith, don't criticize anybody. Just see the good in everybody. Christ Jesus was not like that. He picked out the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew 23, and that's a real eye-opener, isn't it? And so the faithful and discreet slave class follows the same line today. And that's why we'll maybe get, for example, the recent Awake magazine on the Pope. At a time when everybody's idolizing this Pope, when the whole subterfuge is gaining success even with people who are not Catholics, the faithful slave has indicated, here is the danger. A man who is leading astray millions of people into believing that Mary is the answer to mankind's problems, when the answer is God's kingdom through Christ. As simple as that. Well, maybe that's a digression, but anyway, it came out of sanctification. Sanctification without which no man will see the Lord. Carefully watching that no one may be deprived of that undeserved kindness of God, that no poisonous root may spring up and cause trouble. And that does happen sometimes in the congregations, doesn't it, brothers? It's a painful process, and it hurts us all. No one likes to see tension in a congregation, because it is not necessary. Love never fails. Then why should there be tension in a congregation? Why should there be tension between brothers and sisters? Why should a poisonous root spring up and cause trouble? Because someone is not really appreciating their inheritance, not appreciating their relationship to Jehovah. But he goes further, and that many may not be defiled by it. And verse 16, that there may be no fornicator, nor anyone not appreciating sacred things, like Esau, who in exchange for one meal gave away his rights as firstborn. Now here is the remarkable comparison that Paul brings to our attention. Yes, he is speaking here of Esau and relating the case of Esau to a fornicator. Now, before we examine this situation and its meaning, we have to think, well, is this a situation that applies in a general sense to Jehovah's people? Not at all. The vast majority of Jehovah's people are maintaining their integrity. The vast majority of you here are doing likewise. Your faithfulness in preaching the good news of the kingdom week after week, your faithfulness in attending the meetings, your faithfulness in representing Jehovah in your daily lives, all of this is an encouragement to every one of us. And it is because we are aware of this counsel. That's why we realize, for example, in verse 12, Paul says, hence, straighten up the hands that hang down and the enfeebled knees, and keep making straight paths for your feet, that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather that it may be healed. And the vast majority of us have done that. We have stiffened up spiritually. We've strengthened ourselves spiritually. And we can certainly notice that in recent years. Having cleaned out of Jehovah's organization the apostate elements, we now have a vibrant body of Jehovah's people that are doing the most remarkable work in the history of Jehovah's people in modern times. And we have the wonderful report that you will have noticed in this week's Watchtower, with a whole chart laid out there of what is going on. It's so easy to pass those pages over in the Watchtower, but you analyze that chart. For example, when you go home, check how many countries, or which are the countries that now have over 100,000 publishers. You know, it's easy to say 100,000 publishers. But can you imagine the work that has been involved, the faithfulness and integrity to produce 100,000 publishers in a country? Do you know how many publishers we had in the world in 1943? In the world! In 1943. Just over 100,000. Just over 100,000 worldwide 40 years ago. We now have 6 countries with over 100,000 witnesses. Isn't that marvelous, brothers? We have 26 countries with over 20,000 publishers in their ranks preaching the good news of the kingdom. Yes, great increase is now taking place. How it makes us think of Isaiah 60:22. And Jehovah will accelerate it in his due time. And here we are, poised and prepared to give the most massive witness ever given in the history of humankind. And the organization is prepared. This marvelous breakthrough that the brothers have accomplished in Brooklyn with the MEPS system. This is the multi-language electronic phototype setting system. We have done something that the commercial world wouldn't even attempt to do. And that is to produce a computer system that can be used for up to 200 languages. Can you imagine having a keyboard where you're writing text in English and you suddenly want to insert a word in Greek? You just call up the Greek and write it in. Back to English. Carry on. Same keyboard. Carry on writing. Now you want to put a word in Hebrew. Call up the Hebrew. Put in the Hebrew word. And then back to your English. And it means that we're reaching this capability. I believe they're up to the capability of 160 languages now with our MEPS system. We're aiming for 200. And aiming for simultaneous publication of many of the publications that we have. To be able to give a simultaneous message. This is a tremendous breakthrough. And we are pioneers in that respect. And speaking of pioneers, how about the number of pioneers that are preaching the good news of the kingdom? How many here are pioneers, regular pioneers, special pioneers, or auxiliary pioneers? Raise your hands, those who are pioneers, regulars, auxiliaries, specials. Excellent. Because certainly what Esau did had nothing to do with immorality. Well then, what is the relationship? The relationship is in the mental attitude. Because it's the same mental attitude. This attitude can lead to all kinds of sins, all kinds of breaking of integrity. It's the attitude of not appreciating sacred things. As another translation says, loses his reverence for the things of God. And then, like Esau, is ready to sell his birthright to satisfy, notice this, brothers, to satisfy the momentary hunger of his body. That's Philip's translation. To satisfy the momentary hunger of his body. Now that's what Esau did. The momentary hunger, the red, quick, please give me the red. But then in the same terms, we can be saying this with regard to other things. With regard to sexual appetite, with regard to pleasures, with regard to acquiring the things of this system of things in an unnecessary way. That's why another translation says, no one worldly minded like Esau, the New English Bible. Unprincipled like Esau, says Stonfield. Now we certainly do not want to be then like Esau. Because in our case the hunger can be of different types. It can be a hunger for pleasure in excess. The Bible does not condemn us having moments of pleasure and relaxation. But in excess, that's different. See, we're living in a time when we can call this, I notice it coming from a different culture, coming from Europe and coming into the States and having been here now nearly 3 years. But you see, there's a word used over here that is not used as often in other countries of the English-speaking world. I wonder if you know what the word is. It's only a short word. I heard it last night in the airport. We were there in the airport. We had to wait 2 hours for that plane to leave. And there was a young fellow there talking about his life and his work and talking to some other people. We could hear the conversation. And he was saying with regard to his secular work, well, you see, you don't have to work hard. It's fun. It's all fun. You don't have to work hard. It's fun. And there's the word, fun. And without realizing it, we can fall into the same trap. We're always thinking in terms of fun. What's fun? Organized fun. What's the fun for this weekend? What's the next session of fun? As if fun were the very essence of life. And that is not so. Fun should be a contrast, a temporary contrast, relatively short contrast to the realities of life. And the realities of life are responsibility, duty, doing things that are worthwhile, things that leave a permanent record. Fun does not leave a permanent record. If a person lives a life of fun, at the end of his life, he dies at the age of 70, I had a life of fun. What you got to show for it? What kind of a register have you got with God? Fun is all right to break up the routine, and Jehovah knows that only too well. But let us not fall into the trap, which is the worldly trap, because it's worldly thinking, that life has always to be centered around fun. Not with us. Our lives are centered around our worship of the sovereign Lord Jehovah, the God of the universe. And let us never forget that. So let fun not be our plate of soup or stew. Another plate of stew can be illicit sex, and thousands have fallen into that trap. Another plate of stew can be an inordinate desire to become wealthy, like some in the world, or to earn, as they say here, a fast buck, but doing it by means that really implicate your integrity, or gambling, or many other things, getting involved in drugs, smoking, and things of that nature. And really we have to recognize that Esau's mentality has led a few of our brothers and sisters into these very things. And by this they have disdained the inheritance. They have chosen a fast plate of lentil stew in exchange for their integrity. They have sacrificed sacred things, spurned sacred things. And we know that maybe they didn't realize it at the moment. And we are happy to say that many who have fallen have repented and have come back into the congregation, and we are so happy to have them back. Others have not. But the thing to remember, brothers, that when one falls, then we have spurned sacred things. We've spurned integrity, spurned chastity, spurned loyalty, spurned our relationship with Jehovah God, spurned our relationship with the congregation, with our brothers. All of that for what? Quick! The red. Give me some of the red. But it may not be stew. It might be illicit sex, adultery, fornication, homosexuality, smoking, drugs, excessive pleasure, excessive fun, and so on. So, why does the danger exist? Why is it that certain brothers do fall into this trap of adopting the mentality of Esau? I think basically it's because, without realizing it, we allow our spirituality to slip. We ourselves start to fulfill the very scriptures we quote to others. Let's take an example. 2 Timothy 3:4. This is one we've been quoting for decades. But certainly it's 10 times truer today than it was 35 years ago. That's 2 Timothy 3, this is the famous one. Know this, is in the last days, critical times, hard to deal with, will be here. And these are critical times. It's hard for the young people to realize this, because they have no point of reference. I have a point of reference. When I started preaching, I was about 15 years of age. That's just over 35 years ago, so you can make your calculations. But I used to use that scripture with total conviction. And you did too, you older brothers, right? You used it too. Last days, critical times, here they are. Back there in the 40s, in the 50s. But in comparison to the world of today, that world looks like a world of saints. Right? It does. Because things have changed tremendously. We only have to see the influence of drugs, the influence of television, and the influence of immorality, especially in the homosexual field, to realize how this scripture is being fulfilled 10 times more now. But notice verse 4. Paul says also, betrayers, headstrong, puffed up with pride, and then here it comes, lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God. Now we quote it against the world. Let us be careful that particular clause or phrase does not bounce back against us. That we should not be planning our lives thinking, first of all, in terms of pleasure, in terms of fun, and organizing a different kind of fun for every weekend. It exists, brothers, it exists. I'm not going to go into details, otherwise people will start thinking I'm picking on their favorite pastime. I have my pastimes too. I enjoy a bit of fun too. Like a game of tennis, even though you may not believe it. Played at my pace, of course. But I can't think in terms of playing tennis every weekend. There's too much to do. But it certainly is nice to be able to have a game of tennis once every 3 months. And in Bethel, you're lucky if you can do it. First of all, you can't find any free tennis courts in New York. But anyway, but the thing is that when I do get the chance, I enjoy it. It's something precious. It isn't something boring every week, a tiring routine. It just pops up. Maybe just a spontaneous 3 or 4 of us can get together. Right, we'll go. And we enjoy it. 1 hour, that's all we can do, 1 hour, back to work. Because we have to go at 6:30 in the morning to play because it's the cheapest hour. Can you imagine? Must be crazy. But what I'm trying to illustrate, brothers, do not plan your lives around pleasure and fun. Plan your lives around your relationship to Jehovah. Plan your lives around your service to God, your preaching activity, your helping other people. For this is the sublime pleasure of being a Christian. Helping other people. When you are conducting Bible studies, when you are seeing people respond and they come to the meetings and their lives change for the better, what an enormous pleasure it gives you to serve others right within the congregation, to spend yourself on behalf of your brothers and sisters who may need help because of old age or sickness or spiritual problems. So that is why we emphasize, do not become lovers of pleasure, because pleasure too, in excess and out of proportion, can become a plate of stew. The red, give me the red, quick. Well, do we sometimes tend to miss meetings on the slightest pretext? Do we sometimes tend to miss the preaching activity, likewise, on the slightest pretext? Is our personal study sporadic? Our preaching activity irregular? Our prayers mechanical and routine? Do your children sometimes have to remind you, hey, Dad, what about the prayer before we eat, Dad? What about the prayer? Oh yes, I forgot all about it. Yeah. You know why it makes us smile? Because we've done it, right? It's happened. Sometimes we forget. And the reason is the pressure of the world, and we forget spiritual values. And yet this is so necessary for the home to have a spiritual atmosphere, for our children to grow up in that spiritual atmosphere, and in such a way that the children can see that Mom and Dad live the truth. They love the truth. If you parents live the truth and love the truth, your children will live it and love it too. But if your children get to suspect that is just kind of half and half, that you're going through the motions, they'll catch on pretty quick, and then you'll have a disagreeable surprise. I mention this, brothers, from an experience that we had in Spain that I can recall so clearly. Lovely family, friends of ours, 2 boys growing up in the truth. But Dad, although he was a ministerial servant, did not really live the truth. He was a half-hearted, lukewarm type of person. Sunday morning, yes, he would be there for the text before we go out to preach. But then what was his preaching? Go back home and take a Bible study with the boys. He'd never go from house to house. And the boys knew that. They knew that Dad didn't like preaching. Dad didn't like going from house to house. Well, you see the foundation it laid. Dad did a lot of other foolish things too. He taught the boys not to respect Mother. That if Mother said no, he'd say yes. Don't worry, boys, come to me. How stupid. But you know, it's an easy trap to fall into. Have any of you fallen into that trap? Are we really living the truth in such a way that we can say, yes, I appreciate the inheritance. I love the inheritance. I want to receive Jehovah's gift of life through Christ Jesus. Well, then our lives should prove it. Because you see, in that family that I've mentioned to you, I went back to Spain in October for 3 weeks. The elder of the 2 boys was disfellowshipped a few months ago for smoking. But he smoked because he wanted out. And it seemed like the easiest way of getting out, to get himself disfellowshipped for smoking. But you see, there is the infallible law of cause and effect. Every effect has its cause or causes. And parents cannot run away and say, well, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my fault. Sometimes it isn't, but sometimes it is. We have to analyze ourselves critically and see what can I do to make sure that my children love the truth, that your children are with you at the meetings, not sat somewhere else in the Kingdom Hall, not gallivanting out on the streets, as we say in England. Gallivanting, have you heard that one before? No, but with you, and with you here in the hall. And if they're old enough to read, they have their own Bible, and they have their own watchtower, and they have their own publications that they're happy to read and underline and follow because they're part of the meeting. Is this a tragedy? It's a tragedy that I've seen, brothers. Another case I give you from the same congregation in Spain. I visited it as circuit overseer back in '72. And there we are at the book study. And this couple, they had this boy 9 years of age, a very intelligent, sharp boy. And he sat there in the book study, bored stiff. Why? Mum and Dad with their Bible and books, and they're really enjoying the study. He doesn't have a Bible or a book. He's just there as a piece of luggage, occupying a seat, and that's it. You know, like the old-fashioned Victorian days, be seen and not heard. Well, we don't want that in our meetings. We want our children to be seen and heard, right? We want them to participate. Well, then why didn't he have a Bible? Why didn't he have a book? Because the parents were indolent. They were neglecting their son, neglecting their child. When I went back to that congregation a few years later, we had to have him before a committee for stealing money from the magazine box. And when I went back in October, he too had been disfellowshipped. It is a painful process. It is heart-rending, especially when one could have prophesied it, because one could see that the parents were not paying attention to their children. And so we bring this counsel to your attention, brothers, because we love your children, and we want you to love them, and we know that Jehovah loves them. Well, then let that love be shown. Let your children be a part of this true worship that we are practicing. Let them see the inheritance and understand the inheritance, that we are talking of real life, everlasting life. So if we are neglecting things in any shape or form, it should be a warning message to us. Spiritual values in the way that I've mentioned, then we might begin to think, could there be a plate of lentil stew in my life? Do you have some lentil stew in your life? Think about it. Is there anything in your life that makes you say, quick, the red, give me the red? Even if I have to miss a meeting, even if I have to miss the preaching. Even if I have to miss my personal study. Well, let us watch it and be careful. What is becoming more important for you than God's kingdom, than your dedication and relationship to Jehovah? Yes, what could be the lentil stew in your case? Let us briefly go over a couple of these points. For example, there are many, many things that could be, and I don't have time to deal with them all. I'd like to just make a few suggestions. I've suggested some already. But I would like to suggest, for example, excessive television can be your plate of lentil stew. And I'll guarantee a lot here have got it right now without realizing it. Do you know that a recent study said that in the United States, the average person, spends 7 hours and 22 minutes watching the TV every day. Now that's incredible. You think 7 hours and 20, that's ridiculous. They're wrong. Well, what about if you put the TV on at 6 o'clock when you come in from work? Maybe you come in earlier, I don't know. But say you put it on at 6 o'clock. Well, what time do you turn it off? You'll be lucky if you turn it off before 11. Why? Because they put the news on at 10. And you want to hear the news, even if you did hear it at 6, the news might have changed since 6 o'clock. So you stick it out till 11 o'clock. Well, you've blown 5 hours. 5 hours of your life have gone that day. You couldn't do anything else. It's impossible. In the old days with the radio, remember the old radios with the batteries and the accumulators with the sulfuric acid in them? I remember that takes me back to my childhood days. And to go to the shop and have the battery charged. You know, the radio would conk out just on the most important program. But anyway, at least with the radio you could do other things. With the TV you can't. You've all got to be hypnotized in front of the TV. Or it could be immoral television with all kinds of cable stuff and other programs that are now available to the public of the basest kind, to debase values, debase spirituality. This can only please the demons. The demons must be rejoicing in the world as it is today, because the demons are inveterate voyeurs. They can't do it, but they like to watch it. So if they can get mankind to do it, and they can watch, great. Whether it's sadism or crass and perverse sexual aberrations, they'll enjoy watching it. Are we going to be suckers for them? Because that's what it amounts to. Because of the crass immorality that's being put across to infect the mind, or in the movies, or it could be a plate of stew in the form of worldly associations. We seem to be attracted by a certain group of people or class of people, and we justify being among them. We like being among them. Maybe it'll further your career. And you don't realize it, but little by little it's undermining your spiritual values. And you'll start missing meetings because of these very people that will further your career, but will smash your inheritance. Or it could be the desire for something new. The latest model in a car, or the latest model in a hi-fi stereo or whatever, video or whatever. There's always a new model. It'll never stop. Don't ever think you've got the best. You'll never have the best. Because the best is still to come according to the commercial world. They'll always produce something better. Why? Because commerce is based on built-in obsolescence. Built-in. It is planned. But this will only be good for 5 years, and we'll have a new model out, you watch it. We'll have a new model, and we'll make them want that new model, and they'll throw the other one away. It still works, perfectly good, but they're trying to tell you, yes, but you see there's a 5% difference in the audition. The hi-fi, the stereo, the quadraphonic, and all that kind of stuff. Oh, that's true. 5% difference, and you're going to pay another $300 or $400 for 5% difference? But you see, that's what the world does. And so it makes us turn these things into a plate of stew, lentil stew, right in your home. In some cases, it could be sport in excess. Bodily training is fine for a little. It's good to keep healthy if you can, and slim if you can. I can't. But the thing is, it's good for a little. But don't make it the biggest thing in your life. It isn't worth it. You look at some of the burned-out athletes. Their career lasted 5 years, 10 years, whether it be football players, tennis players, or whatever. Burned out. And what have they got to show for it at the end? It could be, in some cases, consorting with an unbelieving person. Yes, and it happens. Consorting in the sense of looking for a girlfriend or a boyfriend, a fiancé, and you just don't find the right person in the congregation. And then what happens? You don't find the right person in the congregation, you start feeling like Esau. Quick! I need a fiancé! Quick! And so, the person then goes outside the congregation. And then you start looking at a person who does not share our values or our principles. Well, you could be laying a trap for yourself. And is it worth it? Just forget the word quick. Slow. Right? And take your time. Because those who marry in haste repent at leisure, or leisure, as you say here. So do not be in a hurry. You can find a suitable person within the congregation. In other cases, the plate of stew could be unnecessary secular work. Now, obviously, I'm dealing with a mixed bag of things here. Some of these activities are licit in moderation. Others are a danger at any price. And this is what we're getting at. That even the licit ones become an abuse if the price paid is spirituality or spiritual progress. If we pay that price, then no matter what it is, it's still lentils. It's a plate of stew. So then how can we strengthen our feeble knees and hands for Jehovah's service? The answer is easy. Get off spiritual junk food. And there's so much of this junk food about. The world is dispensing it. Junk food. You know, they can't understand that word in India. They say, how can food be junk? To people who are dying every day of starvation, how can food be junk? When they see it in the watchtower, the brothers don't understand it. That should make us think. But then again, that's a digression. Let's get off spiritual junk food. Get back to personal study of the Bible. Catch up on your reading of the publications. So many publications. True, but what wonderful publications. Do we not appreciate, brothers, the spiritual food that we're getting constantly through the Watchtower and Awake magazines? Are you not finding them more and more attractive, easier to offer to the people with those front covers, better paper, finer presentation, beautiful artwork? Is it not true, brothers? Are you finding those magazines easy to offer? Well, if that's the case, give thanks to Jehovah and to the faithful and discreet slave class, to the members of the governing body too. They are directing this work, and they're conscious all the time of trying to give the very best for Jehovah and for his people. And yet sometimes we come back and we say, well, that's true, all these things to read, a magazine every week, new books, prepare for the meetings. I don't know why, but there just doesn't seem to be time for personal study. Do you have that problem? I think a lot of us do. Do you find it difficult to set aside time for personal study, to really be able to sit down for 2 hours and really prepare the Watchtower, underline it, check out all the scriptures, write notes in the margin, and be really prepared to answer in the Watchtower without reading the paragraph again? Which so often happens. We get 2 readings of the paragraph. But why don't we just express ourselves in our own words? If we've prepared properly, we can do. Well, what's the problem? Why don't we have time? What has happened to our time? 30 or 40 years ago, there was time to read. I can assure you of that. There was time to read. When I was going to school, I had to have time to read and study. We had 3 to 4 hours of homework every night from the age of 10 onwards. From the age of 10 onwards, 3 or 4 hours of homework. I had time. Why? Because in those days, we didn't have TV, thank goodness. Yeah, there's the reason. You see, what has happened? Inflation has taken over, not just in our money, but in our time. A day no longer is worth 24 hours. It's worth a lot less. 20, 18, 19 hours. Because with our own connivance, a thief steals away maybe a quarter of a day. And who is the thief? What is the thief? Television. It's as easy as that. Do we control television, or does television control us? Are we pouring out the cup of life uselessly, unproductively, day by day in front of a television set? Unless we control television, it will control us and destroy our moral fiber. Television replaces true values with false ones. This is not just a wild statement, it's a fact. Very simple illustration. You take your soap operas. I think that's what you call them, soap operas. And you have famous ones, I believe, like Dallas and Dynasty and what have you. And obviously there are others that I fortunately ignore. But anyway, when we think of these, what is the kind of lifestyle they present? Do they present the lifestyle of ordinary, everyday, common people? I can see you nodding your heads already. No! We're seeing the rich, the powerful, the wheeler dealers, the money people. And what kind of life do they lead? Fornication, adultery, lying, cheating, swindling. Isn't it true, brothers? Right? Well, then what's the insinuation? The insinuation is, as we say in England, what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. In other words, if it's all right for them, it's all right for us. And that's how the master people think. So, well, if that's how the powerful people are living and thinking, we're entitled to do the same thing. And that is how television can undermine spiritual values. To the point of getting involved in this recent case experience, I think it was in the Watchtower of the Awake. Remember that one about the sister who wrote in and said that she suddenly realized she was hooked when she found herself praying on behalf of some character in a soap opera. She was so worried about what was going to happen to this. Oh, Jehovah, don't let it happen. For goodness sake, how far can we go? I visited a family on Sunday. A widowed mother, 3 boys, 14, 12, and 9. And a terrible atmosphere. The son-in-law came and said, please, Pablo, they call me Pablo in Spain, in Spanish, come and visit the family, see what you can do. So I got talking to them, trying to find out what's the reason. Well, tell me, what are your problems? What are your problems? The mother starts telling, the boys are disrespectful, they don't respect me, they answer me back, the eldest one especially. And I got talking to them, and then it came out that the real core of the problem was television. See, the mother has poor health. She has to go to bed at 8:30. And what does she do? She leaves those 3 boys watching television. Do you know how long they watch it? Until 1 o'clock in the morning every night. And the boy, 12 years of age, is literally hooked on these soap operas. On what we call in Spanish telenovelas, novels by television. Because when we said, the mother agreed, we said, right, you're going to bed at 9 o'clock, and you're not going to watch any more soap operas. The boy nearly collapsed and cried. We'd taken away the most precious thing in his life. This is incredible. 12 years of age, I watched it, I couldn't believe it. The boy was drugged already. And this is a true experience. And so the family is in disarray, and the culprit is television. But really, it's not the television set. Let us not throw the blame onto the television, start looking at the television, and there it is, there's enemy number 1. The television set is not enemy number 1. The television set has no personality, no will of its own. We control the television. We're the enemy if we allow it to control us. It's our lack of willpower. It's our being hypnotized. We are hypnotized. Have you ever noticed, brothers, when you sat in front of the television watching a program, 3 or 4, and everybody's grousing about it? Oh, what a lousy program this is. Isn't this terrible? Oh, yeah, isn't it boring? Isn't it boring? Well, why doesn't somebody get up and turn it off? Oh, no, no, we couldn't. It's true. No one has the willpower to turn it off. And so we create our own 1984 situation. George Orwell, Big Brother is watching you. And there's one in every room. Yeah, you know it's a fact. Because I've been to so many homes where there are at least 2 or 3. One in every room. Big Brother is watching you. And he's feeding you his junk food. He's feeding you his junk stew. And television destroys family communication. How do you feel when someone walks in and you're watching your favorite TV program? You didn't expect them to knock on the door. Oh, who's this? You know why we're laughing, brothers? Because you know it's true. It's true. We all go to the door. Some brothers have come to see us. Or couldn't they have come some other time? Yes, come in, sit down, and shut up. Makes us laugh, brothers, but I want you to recognize that behind every smile or laugh there's a shaft. Because there is. You see, there is the trap. We fall into it. We fail to realize that our spiritual values are undermined, and television can become the time-consuming, time-wasting plate of stew. That doesn't mean to say we shouldn't have television. There are good programs, very few, but there are some. You can find them. Check them out on the program. And if you have time, watch those. But don't waste the time on the rest. Turn it off. Yes, the answer is that we've got to have a force, as Paul says in Ephesians 4:23. We need to have this force actuating the mind, that you should be made new in the force actuating your mind. And that is what is needed. An interior force that comes from us, that is capable of saying, we don't want the television, turn it off. We've got something better to do. I want to prepare my watchtower. We want to study this. We want to talk about that. Turn it off. Don't let us get hooked on television. Where our translation says, the force actuating your mind, another translation says, completely new attitude of mind. So we need a completely new attitude of mind, the spiritual attitude that appreciates spiritual things and appreciates the inheritance. Your mind must be renewed by a spiritual revolution, says the Jerusalem translation. A spiritual revolution. And that is what is needed if we're going to show appreciation for spiritual things. And this force is based on our study, based on our association, based on our genuine love for Jehovah's laws and reminders. To love his law, to love what is good and hate what is bad. Hate. Not those who practice, but what it is. To hate what is bad, to loathe it. Then we keep away from it. We don't get as near as possible without crossing the line, which is what some have done. And then fallen across the line and been disfellowshipped. We keep away from it. If we do this, love Jehovah's law, then we will value our inheritance. So television is one thing that I wanted to mention because it does take such a slice out of our lives. But there's something else too that I think we could pay attention to briefly for the benefit of the young people. And I just don't want them to think that I'm taking a regular negative attitude to this. I'm going to talk about music. Now, I like music. I have my own collection of records and all types of music. I wish I were a musician. I wish I could play an instrument, a guitar especially. I would play classical guitar, classical flamenco, something like that. But the thing is that music today is a trap. Music is being put across to the public, modern types of music, certain modern types, that are emphasizing rebellion. They're emphasizing a beat that really is standing up against what they call the establishment. But not just against the establishment, it stands up against values. Permanent, everlasting values, spiritual values, moral values. And this music, with your punk-type individuals, check the word punk in the dictionary, you'll see what it's all about. Garbage. But you see, they're expressing this attitude, and their music has this hard feeling to it, this hard sell. Well, the commercial world wants to put it across because it must sell to the masses. That's why they're so thrilled about a recent individual who has been so successful in the musical world that they're now selling millions of videotapes and video shows and what have you. He has rejuvenated, they say, the business. He's rejuvenated the musical business. But we've got to think, for them to sell millions of records and videos and what have you, they must pander to the public taste. It's the only way. They cannot raise the public taste. They must pander to it, go down to its level. And therefore, that is how they're having success, because they are pandering to the present low taste of this system of things. Can we expect high moral values of this world? This world so aptly described by Paul in Ephesians 4:19. He says, having come to be past all moral sense, and that's bad enough, but he piles it on. Having come to be past all moral sense, they gave themselves over to loose conduct, to work uncleanness of every sort. Isn't that enough? Well, there's still something else. To work uncleanness of every sort with greediness. And that's how it is. Not only do they want to practice sexual aberrations and perversions, but with greediness. This recent news report that I have here mentions the homosexuals that are afflicted with this deadly sickness they call AIDS. But they have, by means of their interviews, reached the conclusion. It says that the average number of sexual partners per lifetime for homosexuals who contracted AIDS was about 1,100. Does it stagger you? They said that in one case they came across one individual who claimed to have had 20,000 partners. Was Paul right or was he wrong when he said, having come to be past all moral sense, they gave themselves over to loose conduct, to work uncleanness of every sort with greediness? Isn't it true? But you see, this is the kind of philosophy and mentality that they're putting into their music as well. And it's not we who say this. I have some photocopies from this book called If They Ask You, You Can Write a Song. This is by Al Kasha and Joel Hirschhorn, songwriters. And they're explaining the basic tricks of how to write modern songs that will sell to the public. And they describe some of these songs. I won't read you the worst of these extracts, otherwise some of you would perhaps have a fit. But it says here on page 138, sexuality is now a common thread in all pop music, but R&B, there are some among us who will understand that, R&B, I'm led to understand it means rhythm and blues, right? But R&B has always been sexual, and this eroticism may still be more characteristic of soul material than of any other kind. Says sexual realism was always primitively, powerfully built into R&B, and you can't be timid and reticent in that area if you want your songs to pack a wallop. Well, now, is that the kind of music we want to be feeding ourselves on? Do we want to be responding bodily to that kind of music and to this kind of individual who knows what the public wants and is willing to pander to them because it makes money? Another paragraph says, the aim of a rhythmic sex record isn't to instruct or analyze or enlighten. Thank you very much for explaining that. It's the musical equivalent of a stag movie and must turn on the dancers or lovers listening to it, or it has failed to accomplish its objective. Do you need it for it to be spelled out any more clearly than that? Page 253, I have another one here. Speaking about a couple of songs or titles, they call it I Feel the Earth Move, or like Shop Around is a title that writes itself. The listener knows immediately that the phrase is a metaphorical description of love and lust. The sexual undercurrents are clear, imaginatively projected without need for overt pop pornographic references. The song opens with a throbbing, insistent piano figure that captures the flavor of the title. A mood, both sexual and romantic, is conjured up. And that is their aim and their desire, because it is what the public want. Well, then here is the warning. Do we want that kind of music to be our plate of stew? Is that going to be the kind of lentils that we're going to allow into our lives so that we will disdain spiritual things, disdain sacred things, disdain the counsel that comes from the faithful and discreet slave? Will we look at a Watchtower or a Wake magazine that comments on this? They don't know. What do they know? You would be surprised what they know. because those magazine articles are not prepared superficially or lightly. Tremendous investigation goes into the preparation of every one of those articles, and consultation. And the faithful slaves knows clearly the land it is treading. So let not the subtle machinations of Satan undermine your spiritual values. We do not want that as a plate of stew. We have better values, and we say again to the parents, fulfill your role. Take a loving interest in your children. Take an interest in their music and what really is good music for them. And I don't just mean theocratic music. Theocratic music is the best. But there is good music in the world. There is music that does not undermine spiritual values, that does not provoke sexuality, that does not try to provoke immorality. Well, then parents take an interest and help your children to appreciate that kind of music. If they want to buy records, check first what kind of records. Read the jackets, read the lyric, find out what it's all about. And now we have such a big stimulus, because the faithful and discreet slave, as was mentioned in the assembly last year, has gone to tremendous effort to produce a new songbook that we've heard all about. And I'm certainly very happy to be able to show it to you. I haven't brought along 2,000 copies, but here we now have the new songbooks, Sing Praises to Jehovah. This is the large edition. In actual fact, the large edition is just a replica of the small edition. There's no difference in the contents whatsoever. You've got the complete music, and you've got the arrangements for guitar and the complete lyrics. But they are presented as two very beautiful books, and we have, I think, 225 kingdom songs that have been prepared by composers and musicians, brothers, from all over the world. And so here we have something that is going to be stimulating to get to know this new music, get to know the words, get to know upbuilding things, because certainly as we sing these kingdom songs, we are going to be sure that these songs and this music fulfill Philippians 4:8. Because in Philippians 4:8 we have the criterion for anything that we want to put into the mind. Anything. The criterion is simple. Philippians 4:8, finally, brothers, whatever things are true, whatever things are of serious concern, whatever things are righteous, whatever things are chaste, whatever things are lovable, whatever things are well spoken of, not the filth of this world, whatever things are well spoken of, whatever virtue there is, and whatever praiseworthy thing there is, continue considering these things. Yes, if we put our minds on upbuilding things, then we will not have the mind or the mentality of Esau, but rather the mentality of his brother Jacob. We will see the promises. We will see the inheritance. We will want to have Jehovah's blessing, and therefore we will keep faithful. We will have the mentality of Moses as expressed in Hebrews 11:24-26. By faith Moses, when grown up, refused to be called the son of the daughter of Pharaoh. He had it made in the courts of Pharaoh. He could have lived in the lap of luxury and education and had every benefit from that Egyptian society. But he refused it, choosing to be ill-treated with the people of God, to be despised and disdained and spurned, rather than to have the temporary enjoyment of sin. Why? Because he esteemed the reproach of the Christ as riches greater than the treasures of Egypt. For he looked intently, that's the key word, the adverb, intently, not vaguely, now and then, when I have time, no, intently. He looked intently toward the payment of the reward. Do we look intently to the payment of the reward? Are we looking intently? Are we conscious of our inheritance? What is worth more to you? Your inheritance, the life that is life indeed on a paradise earth with your loving brothers and sisters, and being able to be there at the resurrection. I want it. I want to be there. I want to see my grandfather that I never met. The resurrection means something real to me, and it should mean something real to you. Think in terms of real people that you want to see. that you want to teach the truth to. Yes, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the real inheritance. Yes, see the resurrection and be able to give our loved ones a welcome. Is that what you appreciate? Or would you really... Or would you really prefer a plate of lentil stew? Quick, the red.